At 20 minutes to 9 on the 18th of October, I was on one knee on a parquet floor in a banquet hall in Point Place, holding a cake knife against my wife's dress. It was the ceremonial knife with the white ribbon on it, because nobody brings scissors to a wedding. I was cutting through blue taffeta, about 4 inches above the seat of her wheelchair, working slow, keeping the flat of my hand between the edge and her leg. The band had stopped. 120 people had gone from talking to not talking, which is a sound of its own. My daughter-in-law was at the head table with the microphone still in her hand, and she said 8 words into it. "Dad, don't make this about you again." "Not to me." Into the microphone. 27 days later, outside Probate Courtroom 2 on the 3rd floor of the Lucas County Courthouse, that same woman stood in front of 6 strangers waiting for an elevator and told them exactly what my son had done. I was 11 feet away, and I did not say one word. Everything I had to say had already been printed, signed, recorded, and served, and the postmark was 3 days old. Before I take you back to March, tell me in the comments what state you're watching from, and then tell me one other thing, because it's the only question this story is really about. Have you ever handed one of your children something you didn't keep a second copy of? If you're new here, subscribe. This one's worth the whole way. My name is Emmett Veer. I'm 70 years old. For 42 years, I ran a commercial print shop on Detroit Avenue in Toledo, Ohio. A brick building with a loading bay and a hand-lettered sign over the door with a hawk on it. Here's what 42 years of that does to a man, and it explains everything that comes later. You learn to look at flat things under a raking light. That's the term. You hold a sheet so the light runs across it instead of at it, and the surface tells you things the ink never will. You learn the difference between a page that was printed and then written on, and a page that was written on and then printed. You learn that a signature and a machine leave 2 different kinds of marks, and the order they go down in cannot be undone. None of that seems useful at a wedding. Hold on to it anyway. My wife's name is Juny. We were married in 1979. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2013, and since 2020, the chair has been full-time. Below about mid-thigh, she doesn't have much feeling. That's not a small detail, and I'm going to ask you to remember it. People assume a man my age has something hidden, gold in a coffee can, a number he never told anybody. What I had was a paragraph. I gave it away in 3 pieces, and only 2 of them ever got talked about at the dinner table. The building went to my son Nolan in March for $1, and, as the language goes, love and affection. He drafted the paperwork himself. He's worked at a title company on Talmadge for 12 years, and he offered to save me the fee, and I let him, because I was proud of him for knowing how. The second piece was 60% of the operating company. He ran it. He was good at the selling part. I was never good at the selling part. The third piece I didn't give away, and nobody at that table gave it 30 seconds. The name. Veer Press is registered to me personally with the Ohio Secretary of State and has been since 1983. The City of Toledo printing contract and 3 school district contracts are held by Emmett Veer, doing business as Veer Press, as a certified vendor. Those don't transfer. The company licensed the use of my name for $1 a year on 30 days' notice, and Nolan signed that license in a hallway with the paper against the wall because he was late for something. The deed had a paragraph in it I didn't write. Sal Fabry wrote it. 81 years old, did my legal work since the Carter administration, kept one hand on his hat the whole meeting like he had somewhere better to be. He put 3 conditions in. Juny keeps the attached apartment behind the shop as long as she lives. The ramp and rear access stay where they are. And no mortgage or lien goes on that property in any way that puts the first 2 at risk. Then he put in the part with the teeth. Break any of those, and the grantor may declare the conveyance terminated and take the property back. Nolan read it twice. He set the page down and said, "That's an ugly paragraph, Sal." Sal said it was supposed to be. Sal Fabry died on the 11th of April, of a stroke, in his car in a grocery store parking lot. After that, there were exactly 2 people alive who had read that paragraph. One of them was me. The other one was the man who typed it. The last piece I gave came in September, and it wasn't property. Juny and I had an account we'd been feeding since 2014, and it had $96,000 in it, and every dollar had a job. A used van with a lowered floor, somebody to stay overnight 3 nights a week, a ceiling lift for the bedroom, so I'd stop doing with my back what I am not going to be able to do with my back at 75. In September, my son sat in our living room and said the wedding had gotten away from them and the venue wanted the balance in 14 days. I said no. I said it twice. Juny was in her chair by the window with the Afghan over her knees, and she waited until he was out the door and down the steps, and then she said 5 words. Let him have a day. I wrote the check on the 12th of September. The morning of the wedding, she was fussing with her cushion. She made it herself, back when her hands still did what she asked them to. She copied the hawk off the shop sign, the one my father-in-law painted in 1984, and stitched it in red across the front, and the red had gone pink the way red does. Medicare would have covered a new cushion. She used that one. She smoothed the corner with her thumb and asked whether it looked all right or whether it was going to embarrass anybody. I told her it was the best-looking thing that was going to be in that room. I have thought about that sentence more than any other sentence in this story. There was no room on the riser for a wheelchair, so we moved Juny into a banquet armchair for dinner and folded her chair against the wall behind her. That was my idea. I want that on the record. My daughter-in-law left the head table twice, once at about 7:40 for a shawl for her mother, once at 10 after 8 to check on the cake. I watched her both times, and if I make it sound like I knew, none of the rest of this means anything. I saw a bride in a hurry. That's all I saw. At 8:05, my son helped me get his mother back into her chair. He took her under the arms, and I took her legs. He did it well, and I remember thinking that. Now the part about the feeling. Juny's MS took the sensation out of her legs in stages. She has known for years she can burn herself on a heating pad and not find out until she looks. She checks every night, the way you'd brush your teeth. She did not check at a wedding reception. Nobody would. So for 40 minutes, she sat where we put her. She talked to her sister. She clapped for the first dance. From the neck up, she was having the evening she'd told me she wanted. At about 8:35, she reached down to shift herself in the seat, which she does 200 times a day, and she couldn't move. She said it quietly, to me and only to me, and twice before I understood, because I was looking at the dance floor. Emmett, I'm stuck to the chair. Cyanoacrylate goes off in about 10 seconds against skin and faster against a porous surface, and her cushion was cotton canvas over foam. It went through the canvas, through the taffeta, through the lining, and it found the back of her right thigh and held all 3 together like they'd been laminated. There's a right way to handle that. Acetone or warm water and soap, and you take 20 minutes and you do not pull. A young man from the catering staff came over to help, and he was trying to be useful, and between the 2 of us we pulled. The cushion tore first. It tore along the top of the hawk, right through the wing, so the red came apart in the middle of the bird. Then a piece of skin about the size of a business card came away with the lining. Juny has been on corticosteroids on and off since 2014, and one of the things that does over 11 years is thin the skin until it behaves like tissue paper left in the sun. She didn't make a sound. My wife did not make one sound. The blood came through the blue taffeta in front of 120 people, and the videographer had a light on a stand, and that light did not go off. I got up off the floor and put my hands under the edge of the gift table and lifted it. Card box, centerpiece, and a champagne tower somebody's aunt had spent an hour building. 19 glasses across 6 feet of parquet. I've replayed those 4 seconds more than anything else in my life, and I still can't tell you what I thought I was accomplishing. Here's what I know now. That table was the whole point. Everything before it was the price of admission. My daughter-in-law came off the riser with the microphone in her hand and said, "He's having another episode." Another. Not an episode. Another one. Said to a room of people who had never seen me raise my voice, in a tone that suggested this was a burden the family had been carrying quietly for some time. 4 people stopped me at the coat check to tell me they understood, and that it happens to everybody's dad eventually. Nobody asked about my wife. The next morning at 8, they came to the shop. My son, his wife, her mother Rhoda, and a step behind Rhoda the whole time. Sloane's younger sister Tally. I asked one question. I asked who put glue on my wife's chair. Sloane didn't deny it. I've thought about that a lot. She didn't say she hadn't done it, and she didn't get angry, which is what a person does when they've been accused of something they didn't do. What she did was rebuild the room. She said the chair sat unattended against a wall for 2.5 hours at a public event with an open bar, and that Juny keeps adhesive in her sewing basket for her felt work, and everybody in this family has heard her complain the cap doesn't seal. Then she opened a folder and put two things on my layout table. A receipt from a craft store, dated the 15th of October, with a 2-pack of cyanoacrylate on the third line. Paid cash. And in the customer field at the top, my wife's name and our phone number, because Juny signed up for their rewards card in 2019 and gives that number to every register in Lucas County. And a photograph of her sewing basket by our back door with a tube of glue lying on top where anyone could knock it. Both of those were made 3 days before the wedding. Rhoda started crying about then. She said this family had been carrying it for a year and nobody wanted to be the one to say it out loud. My son stood at the window with his back to the room and looked at the parking lot and did not say one word for 11 minutes. Tally looked at the floor, so I gave up. I told them they were probably right. I said there were mornings I couldn't find my own keys. I said I was sorry about the gift table and I'd pay for the glasses. You could feel the room drop its shoulders, all 4 of them at once, like a press coming off pressure. Then Sloan said the wheelchair would be an insurance claim, and the carrier wouldn't talk to anybody but the policyholder without paperwork, and Nolan could handle all of it if I'd sign a temporary authorization. The notary was her cousin Denise. She came at 9:15 with a stamp in her purse. They didn't bring a form. They said the language was still being drafted, and the portal was down. So I signed 3 sheets, and they were blank, and they weren't stapled to anything, and Denise stamped all 3 and dated them. I signed all 3 in the same place, low and left of center, about 2/3 of the way down the page. There wasn't a line. I put it there anyway. That afternoon my son fired Curtis Amaya. 29 years and 9 months on that press. The letter said inventory discrepancies, and Curtis brought it out to me in the parking lot and held it up and waited, because Curtis is deaf and he was watching my face for what it meant. At 6:20 that evening, the Toledo Police Department called. I thought, good. Somebody finally called somebody. The officer wanted to know if I could come in and talk about an incident at a banquet hall in Point Place on the night of the 18th. He read me the complainant's name off his screen. Filed at 11:20 that same night, 2 hours after we left, with a 40-second video clip. There was a file open in the system by then, with my name in it. It was in the wrong box. A guardianship application in Ohio is a public record. Anybody can walk into the probate court on Adams Street and ask for a copy of anything on the docket, $2 a page. Nobody told me it had been filed. Ruth Ann Pike plays cards with my wife on Thursdays, and her nephew clerks downtown. I went on the 25th. 19 pages, $38. Our building faces west, and in the last week of October, the sun comes in low and hits the layout table at about a 15-degree angle. It's the worst light in the world to work under, and the best light in the world to look under. I wasn't looking for anything. I was standing there reading 19 pages about myself, and I got to page 11, and I saw the shine before I read the words. Page 11 was a waiver. It said I'd been notified, that I did not require a hearing, and that I consented to the appointment of my son as guardian of my person and my estate. At the bottom was my signature, 2/3 of the way down, left of center, and running straight across the top of it, in 11-point type, was the line, I have been advised of my right to be represented by counsel. The toner sat on top of my name. 1 minute on why that matters. Because everything turns on it. Laser toner is a powder. The machine lays it down and runs the sheet through a fuser at about 400 degrees, and the powder melts and welds to the surface. It sits up. It has gloss. Ballpoint ink does not. It goes into the fiber and leaves a groove you can feel with your thumbnail on the back of the sheet, so the order is never in question. Ink written over toner rides the gloss and skips. Toner printed over ink covers it, and where it covers it, the shine runs unbroken. The shine ran unbroken. The page had been signed first and printed second. It had been blank when I signed it. They had one of my 3 sheets from the 19th of October, and my consent to lose my legal existence had been laid down on top of my name at 400 degrees. I checked it the way I'd check it for a customer, because I didn't trust my own eyes either. Loop on the crossing points. A strip of low-tack tape lifted off a 1/2 inch of the signature, and the toner came up in flakes and the ink stayed in the paper. 40 seconds. That's the part I want you to sit with. If you're my age and somebody in your family has started using a certain tone with you, they had a doctor's letter saying, I couldn't manage my own affairs. And I stood at that table and did a thing in 40 seconds that not one person in that family could have done in a week. I never argued with them about whether my mind worked. Not once, the whole way through. Arguing is what they wanted. And now the other thing. I signed those 3 sheets low and left of center on purpose. I didn't know what they were going to put on them. I had about 90 seconds to decide something. What I knew was that a blank page with a signature on it is a page waiting for something, and I've spent my life knowing where a block of type lands on a sheet before the sheet goes in the machine. So I put my name in the one place whatever came later would have to come down on top of. Not on a line. There wasn't a line. That was the whole idea. I taught Nolan to read a sheet when he was 9. 2 proofs of the same job, one good and one bad, held up to the window. He tilted the sheet without me telling him to. He figured that out himself, at 9. I've wondered whether he forgot, or whether he decided it didn't apply to the old man anymore. I don't have an answer. I have a preference. Page 14 was the medical. Ohio makes you file a statement of expert evaluation with a guardianship application. Form 17.1, signed by a physician, less than 6 months old. Mine was signed by a doctor in Perrysburg I have never met, on a date in October when I was, according to a receipt, having a filling replaced in Sylvania. The 17.1 was black and white. Nothing to see. Behind it was a 2-page supplemental narrative on the clinic's letterhead, and the letterhead had a logo in 2 colors. That's the whole mistake. Every color laser printer sold in this country since the late 90s lays down a pattern of pale yellow dots across the entire page. You can't see them at arm's length. They encode the machine's serial number and the date and time of the job. They were put there for the Secret Service, and they've been documented publicly for 20 years. The Electronic Frontier Foundation published the decoding grid. It's on the internet. I don't have a forensic lab. I have a light table, a blue LED, and a copy stand I use for shooting texture samples. I photographed a 2-inch square of white margin and pulled the yellow channel. 15 columns by 8 rows. I read it off the chart like a ruler, twice, and then had Curtis read it a 3rd time, because I wanted a second pair of eyes with no reason to want a particular answer. A serial number, and a time stamp. 11:14 at night, the 22nd of October. The serial belonged to the Xerox 700 standing 11 steps from where I was sitting. We close at 6. 3 people had keys. 2 days later, I ran the year-end calendar order out to my son's title company. I've delivered that job myself every December for 12 years. Nobody thinks twice about the old man with the hand truck. The waiting area has a glass wall onto the hallway where the closing rooms are. I sat in it for 19 minutes with a cup of their coffee. Nolan came out on the phone and stood with his back to the glass, which is a thing people do when they think glass is a wall. I heard 4 words clean and the rest in pieces. He said the escrow reconciliation. Then he said, not if the audit lands before the 12th. I didn't know what an escrow reconciliation was. I had a man's voice and 2 phrases and no idea what they meant. I turned the delivery ticket over on my knee and wrote 3 words on the back in pencil. Escrow, audit, 12th. I got home and put the ticket in the 2nd drawer of my workbench. The cushion was in there, the one with the hawk torn through the wing. I'd put it in a contractor bag in the garage on the 19th and carried that bag out to the curb myself. Somebody had gone out to the curb and gone through it and folded it and put it in my drawer. I hadn't told one person anything. Somebody in my house already knew. Ruth Ann Pike is 74, and she was an assistant prosecuting attorney in Lucas County for 26 years. She has played cards with my wife on Thursday nights since 1998, and she cheats at hearts. I put the delivery ticket on her kitchen table and asked what an escrow reconciliation was. She read 3 words in pencil and got up and put the kettle on, which is what she does instead of swearing. When you buy a house, your money doesn't go to the title company. It goes into an account they hold for you, and it is not theirs. Not for 1 hour. Twice a year, the underwriter that backs the company comes in and counts. I asked what happens if the count doesn't match. She said, then it stops being an accounting problem. Then she asked me what my son had bought. 4 days and 2 phone calls. In the spring of 2023, My son and 2 other men bought 40 acres in Wood County, self-storage. There was going to be an anchor tenant and a rezoning, and by March of this year there was neither, and one partner had moved to Arizona and stopped answering. You can still drive past it. There's a sign with a disconnected phone number on it. He was short about $310,000. The count was set for the 3rd week of November. And here's the part I keep coming back to, because it's the only piece of this I can almost hold in my hand. He needed a bridge loan. Any bank would have written it. That building is worth better than $300,000, and it's clear of everything. Except it isn't clear. It's got a paragraph on it. An 81-year-old man, with his hand on his hat, put 3 conditions in a deed in March, and those conditions were the reason my son could not borrow $1 against that building in October. He'd read them out loud at the table and called them ugly. He had typed them himself. On the 29th, I went out to the back apartment. 3 rooms and a bath put on in 1996 for Juny's mother. Her sewing machine is out there. She sits there most afternoons because the light is better than in the house. Nolan still had a key. He'd had one since he was 15. I was looking for ledger paper. What I found in the second kitchen drawer, under a stack of takeout menus, was a manila envelope with a facility logo on it, an admission packet. A skilled nursing facility in Findlay, 45 miles south, with a locked memory care unit on the 2nd floor, filled out in blue ballpoint. Handwritten, not typed. Patient name, Juny Veer. Date of birth correct. Insurance correct. Under presenting condition, somebody had written progressive cognitive decline, unsafe in home environment. My wife does the crossword in pen, and she does it in about 11 minutes. Anticipated admission date, November 13th. I did the arithmetic on the back of a menu. My guardianship hearing was set for November 14th, the 13th, and then the 14th. Move her out on a Thursday so nobody is living in the apartment. Have me declared incompetent on a Friday so nobody has standing to say a word about it. Then the condition in the deed is broken by a fact instead of an argument. The building is clear, the loan closes, the count matches, and by Christmas, none of this ever happened. It stopped being about a building right then. Up until the 29th of October, I could have been talked into a lawyer and a long letter and a bad Thanksgiving. On the 29th, it became about whether my wife slept in her own bed. The handwriting was my son's. I taught him to put the bar through his 7s because I got tired of him losing points on his math homework. The 7s had bars through them. On the 30th, I went to the shop at 7 in the evening. They were flying out on the 1st. He was at the stone with his sleeves rolled, standing the way he stood at that table when he was 15, weight on his left leg. I never once said the word glue to my son. I asked him why. He put the job jacket down. He didn't rush it and he didn't get loud, and when he talked, he sounded like a man who'd been writing it in his head for 20 years. He said, "You want to know the part you'll never understand? Every single thing you ever handed me still had your name on the paperwork. The shop, the truck, the house. You call that generosity. I'm 41 years old, and I have spent every one of them borrowing my own life back from you, one signature at a time. Mom knew. She used to tell you to let go. You never did. I'm going to stop here, because if I skip this, I'm lying to you." He was right. Not about all of it, but about that. Juny said the same thing to me at our kitchen table in the fall of 2016, and she said it kinder, and I got up and rinsed a plate that was already clean, and we never finished the conversation. She said the boy was 32 and I was still co-signing things. She said a man can't stand up straight while somebody's holding him up. I've had 9 months to find a hole in that, and I haven't found one. I built a shop, and I built a fence around my son, and I called both of them the same word. So when people ask me if I feel bad about how this ended, that's the piece. I'd take that one back. But I'll tell you what I noticed. Standing there. He had an answer for the deed. He had an answer for the loan, and the land in Wood County and the guardianship and the years of my name on his paper. He did not have one word about the chair. Nobody has ever explained the chair to me. Not that night. Not since. A man can be right about his father and still have been in a banquet hall on the 18th of October. On the 31st, I sat at Ruth Ann's kitchen table with the photographs on my phone and 2 cups of tea going cold. She looked at all of it and then said, "What a woman with 26 years in that office says. Call the police tonight. Call Adult Protective Services in the morning. Send the packet to the Attorney General in Columbus. Certified. I said no, and here's why. In the order she knocked them over. There was already a criminal complaint in existence out of the 18th of October, and my name was on it as the subject, filed at 11:20 that night, with a 40-second clip of a 70-year-old man throwing a gift table across a banquet hall. Whoever files first is the complainant, and whoever files second is retaliating. Ruth Ann didn't argue that one long. Then the calendar. To prove a document was altered, you need a forensic examiner and the original, and I had a $2 copy. Toner gloss doesn't photocopy. To get the original out of a court file, you need a subpoena, and for that you need a case and a judge. Ruth Ann said 4 to 7 months, in the tone of a woman rounding down. The hearing was in 14 days. And then the one that put me on my feet. I told her about Finley. The 13th, then the 14th. She said, "Then you call APS. That's what they're for." I asked her who APS investigates when somebody calls about a disabled woman in a home. She stopped with the cup halfway up. Because they investigate the home. They open a file, and the file is about Juny, and the first line says there are concerns about her living environment, and every one of them is true. 68 years old with advanced MS. Primary caregiver is a 70-year-old man with a bad back, a pending guardianship application against him, and a police complaint with his name on it. There's a documented injury on her right thigh that needed a dressing change every night for 2 weeks, and there are photographs of it, and I took them. You show that file to a stranger with a clipboard and a caseload of 40, and tell me what that stranger does. And in Ohio, while it's being sorted out, a court can appoint an emergency guardian on 72 hours' notice. 72 hours. That was the whole road. The people who wanted my wife in a locked unit by the 13th of November had built a situation where the fastest way to get her there was for me to call somebody for help. Ruth Ann set the cup down and looked out the window over her sink for a while. She said, "I can't get around that one." I drove home at 10:30. Juny's dressing gets changed at night. Saline, gauze, the good tape that doesn't take skin with it. She lies on her left side and holds the rail, and it takes about 6 minutes. When I was taping the last edge down, she said, "Emmett, don't take me anywhere anymore." I said something about how it was healing. She said that wasn't what she meant. Don't take me to things. Not Thanksgiving, not the open house in the spring, not the shop thing in December, and she named 2 others I'd put on the calendar without telling her. She said she'd been thinking about it since the 19th. She said she'd had a good long run of being somewhere, and it was all right, and she'd rather be home. And then she apologized to me. She said she was sorry she'd ruined our son's wedding. I sat on the edge of that bed with a roll of tape in my hand, and I could not think of one arrangement of words in the English language that would take that sentence back out of her. I didn't try. That's the part I'd change. I've had time to come up with what I should have said, and I still haven't got it, so I don't think there was one. She fell asleep around 11. She sleeps better than I do. I went out through the breezeway to the shop, and I didn't turn any lights on, and I sat down on the stool by the stone, the one my son used to sit on with a Coke, and I stayed there about 35 minutes in the dark. That building smells like ink and press wash, and it has smelled like that since 1983. I thought about her mother's apartment out back with the sewing machine in it and the light that's better than in the house. I thought about a room in Findlay with a keypad on the door. I didn't make any speeches. I've watched men tell these stories, and there's always a moment where they stand up, and something changes in the music. Nothing changed. Nobody was there. My wife was asleep 40 feet away and had asked me not to take her anywhere anymore, and I sat on a stool in the dark, 60% of the way through being an old man who had lost. At about 10 after midnight, I turned on the bench lamp. I opened the second drawer and took out the cushion with the hawk torn through the wing and a spool of red thread that had been in there since the Reagan administration, and I put both under the lamp and looked at them. Juny called from the bedroom. She'd seen the light through the breezeway window, and she asked what I was doing out there. I said, "Mending something," and I want to tell you what my voice sounded like when I said it, because I heard it myself and it surprised me. It sounded like a man reading a number off a page. They flew out of Detroit Metro on the morning of the 1st. 11 days at a resort in the hills outside Nosara in Costa Rica, the kind of place that advertises being unplugged and charges extra for it. Sloan put up one picture from the airport, and then nothing. I put a calendar over the bench, and drew a diagonal through the 1st of November before I did anything else. Window 4 at the Lucas County Recorder opens at 8. $6.30 for 3 certified copies. I read my own instrument standing at the counter, and then asked her to pull the index on that parcel for the last 12 months. There were 2 instruments on it, mine from March, and one from the 9th of September. An open-end mortgage, $180,000, secured by the building on Detroit Avenue, recorded, indexed, public. I stood there with my deed in my left hand and his mortgage in my right, and read both again to be sure I wasn't doing what an old man does when he wants a thing to be true. Condition 3. No mortgage, lien, or other encumbrance shall be placed upon the premises in any manner that impairs the foregoing. September 9th. 9 days before the wedding. He didn't break that condition in a hurry after somebody put glue on a chair. He broke it 5 weeks earlier, in a closing room, with a pen. Everything that happened on the 18th of October happened because that mortgage already existed, and the paragraph on it had to be gotten rid of. Here's the part I had wrong for 2 days, and I'm telling you because I had it wrong. I thought a mortgage like that was impossible. Any bank lending that much orders a title search. The search pulls the chain. The chain has my deed in it with the ugly paragraph on page 2, and the loan dies on the desk. So how did it close? Ruth Ann got it in about 4 seconds, and then put the kettle on again. He works at the title company. He ran the search himself. He looked at his own father's deed in his own company's file, and left the condition off Schedule B, and the underwriter insured a policy on what he certified, and the bank closed on it in good faith. That is not a family argument anymore. That's a licensed professional making a false certification to his own underwriter, and the Ohio Department of Insurance regulates every title agency in this state. My son lost this because he skipped the one thing he was paid to do. He didn't read the deed. He typed it in March, and he didn't read it in September. I have spent 42 years telling apprentices that the job that kills you is the one you think you already know. Ruth Ann drafted 2 documents at her kitchen table and wouldn't take $1. A notice of breach and election to terminate, reciting the deed and the mortgage by instrument number and declaring that the grantor elects to terminate and re-enter. And a complaint in ejectment, waiting for a file stamp. She was straight with me about what those did and didn't do, and I'll be straight with you, because I've seen these stories told badly. That notice did not hand me my building back. Ohio doesn't work that way. If the man in possession says no, you sue him, and ejectment takes 4 to 10 months. What the notice did was make the breach a matter of record on a date certain, and a recorded notice of breach is a thing a bank's counsel finds out about inside, about 48 hours. And every commercial note in this country says that if the collateral gets impaired, the whole balance comes due on demand. I wasn't taking the building. I was taking his ability to borrow $1 more against it in the week he needed it most. Then I signed the 3rd page. Termination of the trade name license, 30 days notice. Those 4 contracts are 61% of what goes through that building. On the 4th of November, I told my wife everything. I brought the folder to the apartment at 2 in the afternoon because the light is better out there, and gave it to her in order. The waiver, the dots, the 17.1, the admission packet. She read the admission packet twice. Then she said, "The 13th. I said, "Yes," she said. "And your hearing's the 14th, flat, the way you'd read a departure board." She looked out at the loading bay for a while, and then she asked the only question that mattered, and it wasn't the one I was braced for. She didn't ask me not to do it. She didn't tell me to go get them either. She said, "Emmett, have you worked out what happens if you lose?" I said no. She said, "Then work it out, because if you lose, I'm the one in Findlay, and you'll be somewhere with somebody signing your name." We sat out there until dark, and we worked it out. Her sister in Bowling Green, a set of copies with Ruth Ann, a call list, and 1 bag packed in the front closet from the 6th of November onward that neither of us ever mentioned again. Then she said, "All right." And after that, I asked her the thing I'd been carrying since the 25th of October, who took the cushion out of the trash. She said, "I did." She'd gone out the back on the 19th after they left, down the ramp to the curb on her own, which is a thing she is not supposed to do, and gone through the bag and put it in the drawer where she knew I'd find it eventually. I asked why she hadn't said anything. She said, because you weren't ready to be told anything on the 19th. My wife had been 11 days ahead of me since the beginning. I built a set in those 11 days, and I'll tell you the ugly part of it. 22 flat cartons along the north wall, lights off in the back half, and a cane in every room I was likely to be found in. I've never used a cane in my life. I called Tally, and twice in that call I called her Sloan. I asked my neighbor Dale to drive me to the bank because I probably shouldn't be driving anymore, and Dale told his wife, which is why I asked Dale. I've been told since that this was the clever part. I hated every minute of it. It felt like handing people a picture of myself I'd spent 70 years not being, and watching them take it without one question, because it was the picture they were already holding. Not one of them checked. Curtis came the second night and every night after, 7 at night to 1 in the morning. On the third night he stopped the press and came to the stone with his phone out and asked why I'd asked him about yellow dots in October. So I told him, standing there at 10 at night, and he read my face and my hands and asked me to slow down twice. Then he typed for a long time. He'd gone back to the building on the night of the 22nd, about 11:20, to get a jacket out of his locker without having to come during the day and see anybody. The light was on in the color room. Sloan's Acadia was in the back lot, backed in next to a car he didn't recognize. He stood there about a minute and decided he didn't want the jacket that badly. I asked if he'd heard anything. He looked at me and typed, "Emmett." No. Then, but I don't need to hear anything to know whose car that is. On the 8th of November, I went to the pharmacy on Reynolds with 200 sheets of a proof run under my arm. No cane. Standing straight. Moving like a man with 6 hours of press time waiting. I heard my name from the end of the aisle. Tally. She'd been standing there long enough to watch me come around the end cap. 3 seconds. Neither of us moved. I could go back to being an old man in front of a woman who'd just watched me not be one, which is worse than useless. I could explain, which is begging. I could walk out, which is an answer. What I did was take out my phone and open the photographs. I turned it around and let her look at the back of my wife's right thigh on the morning of the 19th of October, taken before the first dressing, because a nurse on the phone told me to document it. I let her hold the phone. She's 29. Then she handed it back and neither of us said anything, and I paid and went out to the truck. I've had people tell me that was decent, and I don't think it was. I didn't show her to inform her. She'd caught me, and I needed her carrying something heavier than what she was carrying, and I picked the heaviest thing I had. 2 days later it broke. Tally texted her sister. 9 words. "Are you sure about the fine lay thing?" She asked her sister a question at 11 in the morning, and somewhere outside Nosara my daughter-in-law came up on the wrong side of a ridge with her phone in her hand, and 1 bar came in. Our plan had all 3 documents going out on the 14th, in the corridor, after the ruling. That plan died on the 10th of November. If they knew something was coming, and they had 4 days, my son could do exactly one thing that would end all of it. Walk into his own file room, pull the March deed, hand the bank an amended commitment and a story about a clerical error, and cure the breach voluntarily before I ever declared it. The notice had to be served, and the complaint file stamped before he landed. The flight got into Detroit at 6:50 on the evening of the 12th. The 12th was a Wednesday, and it rained the whole way. Certified mail went out of the Detroit Avenue post office at 9:40 in the morning. 3 envelopes, return receipt requested. Ruth Ann drove up from Bowling Green in that rain and hit construction on 75 and called me twice from the road. The clerk of court's window closes at 4:30. She came through the door at 4:23 with the complaint against her chest, and the clerk looked at the clock and took it anyway. The file stamp went down at 4:27. Their plane touched down at 6:50. At 3 minutes after 8, I heard the garage door go up across the road. Then it went back down. Then nothing at all, for a long time. The 14th was a Friday, 44 degrees, raining sideways off the lake. Juny stayed home. That was her decision, and I didn't argue, because she'd asked me not to take her anywhere anymore, and she meant it. The bag was still in the front closet. Neither of us looked at it on the way out. My son and his wife came in at 8:52, tanned. She was carrying a folder about 2 inches thick and a box of tissues, which I've thought about since, because you don't bring your own tissues to a hearing unless you've decided in advance which part is going to be sad. Rhoda sat in the front row and started before the magistrate came in. Tally wasn't there. I came in at 9:03, in the gray suit I got married in, with new buttons that cost me $18. No cane. I'd left all three of them standing in the corners of the shop, and I have not touched one since. I walked up the center aisle past the row where my son was sitting, and I didn't look at him. Ruth Ann was already at the table with 2 banker's boxes. She never withdrew her registration, and she took my case for nothing, and she'd told me in her kitchen she'd been waiting 11 years for a reason to come back to that floor. The magistrate came out, looked at the table on the left, and stopped for about a second and a half. He said, "Good morning, Miss Pike." She said, "Good morning, Your Honor. It's been a while." There were no speeches. I said 11 words the entire hearing, and all of them were yes or no. Ruth Ann asked leave to hand up 2 documents. Page 11 of the applicant's own filing, and a blank sheet of the same stock with the same paragraph on it, signed by me at my kitchen table and run back through our press. She asked the magistrate if he would hold both of them up to the window. He looked at her the way you'd look at anybody who asked you that. Then he got up out of his chair and took the 2 sheets to the east window and turned them. He turned the first one twice. The room was quiet enough to hear the rain on the glass. He came back to the bench and asked whether she had a document examiner. She said the court had one available at the window, and that a print man was sitting at her table who had been reading Raking Light since 1983. After that it went fast. The blown-up photograph of the margin with the yellow channel pulled, the decoding chart off a public website, a serial number, a date, a time, the vendor's service record for the Xerox 700 on Detroit Avenue, showing a job logged at 11:14 at night on the 22nd of October, 3 keys to that building. Then Curtis Amaya went up, with an interpreter, and told them about the jacket and the light in the color room, and the car backed into the rear lot. Asked whether he could be mistaken about the vehicle. He said he'd been setting his lunch cooler down next to it 3 days a week for 2 years. My daughter-in-law opened her folder 3 times during that testimony and did not take one thing out of it. The magistrate denied the application from the bench. He referred the notary commission to the Secretary of State and the physician's signature to the State Medical Board. Then he did the third thing, and Ruth Ann had asked for it in one sentence, and I hadn't understood why until it happened. He referred the conduct of a licensed title agent to the Ohio Department of Insurance. That one didn't come from anything said about my mind. It came from the deed and the mortgage sitting in the same exhibit binder, 9 pages apart, both certified, both out of the county recorder's index. My son had been in that room for 50 minutes, worried about a signature. That wasn't what got him. He turned around while the magistrate was still gathering his papers. He didn't look at me. He looked at his wife. He asked her a question in a voice that carried about 4 rows, and I'm satisfied he was asking it for real, because a man who already knows the answer does not use that tone. He said, "What did you do to the chair?" She didn't answer him. The elevator landing outside that courtroom is about 15 feet across. There were 6 people waiting. A woman with a toddler on her hip, 2 men in work jackets, a young lawyer with a rolling case. There were 3 other things out there. A process server who'd been on the bench since 8:40 with an envelope on his knee, a wheelchair, and in the wheelchair, a cushion with a hawk stitched on it in red, torn through the wing and mended with new thread that hadn't faded yet, in a hand that isn't as steady as it was in 1984. I'd brought it up in the freight elevator that morning and set it in the spot every person in that courtroom was going to have to walk past to go home. I hadn't said one word about it in there. I wasn't going to say one word about it out here either. Rhoda came out first, walking fast, and got about 4 steps past the wheelchair before she stopped and turned around and looked at it. She looked at the cushion for a while. Then she said, "To nobody," at full volume. I told her not to touch that chair. The woman with the toddler turned around. Rhoda said it again, louder, to her daughter coming through the door behind her. "I told you. In the kitchen. I said, don't touch the chair, Sloan. 27 days of one story, and it came apart in a hallway in 11 seconds, and nobody made her do it. She just couldn't stand next to it anymore." My daughter-in-law did not defend herself. I think she'd spent 50 minutes watching her husband's license get referred to the state, and somewhere around the 4th exhibit she'd done the arithmetic on which one of them was going to be standing at the end. She turned to my son and opened up. He drafted the deed. He chose Findlay, and he called them in September, not October. He handed her 3 signed sheets on the morning of the 19th and told her which one to take to Denise. She said, "You told me it was a formality. And then she said the thing that finished it, because it answered the question he'd asked her 4 minutes earlier in front of a magistrate. She said, "And you knew what I did at the wedding. You knew that night. You watched me do it, and you let him pick her up off that chair." 6 strangers waiting for an elevator heard all of it. The process server got up off the bench and did it the way they do. Quiet, envelope held low, my son's full legal name as a question. 3 things. The notice of breach, with the certified mail receipt from the 12th stapled to the face of it, because Ruth Ann wanted the date visible before he opened anything. The complaint in ejectment, file stamp 2 days before he stood in that hallway, and the termination of the trade name license. He read the first page standing up. I watched him get it, in the order a man in that business gets it. The notice was recorded, so the bank already had it, and $180,000 came due on demand. The complaint was stamped before service, which meant there was no clerical error left to invent, and no amended commitment to slide into a file on Monday. The record was closed. He was 2 days too late, and he'd spent those 2 days on an airplane. The name came off the building in 30 days, and 61% of that shop's work is held in my name and does not transfer, and he'd signed that license against a hallway wall because he was late for something, and the count was 10 days out. He looked up from the paper and said, "Dad." He went down on the floor of that corridor. Not all the way, and not for long. He got to one knee, the way a man does when his legs quit rather than because he decided to, and he put a hand out toward me. "I want to tell you exactly what I felt, because I've given the wrong answer before. I did not feel good. I have never once felt good about that hallway. What I felt was what you feel at the end of a long press run at 4 in the morning when the last sheet comes off and it's right. Not joy, the absence of a weight. I didn't raise my voice. There were 6 strangers there and my son was on the floor and I have never had less use for volume. I said, "Stand up, Nolan." And then the rest of it. "I'm not your father in this building. In this building I'm the grantor. The grantor is the one who gets it back." He said something about his mother. I said, "You wrote her name on an admission form, in your own hand, with the 7s I taught you." Then I took the handles of that wheelchair and turned it around and pushed it into the elevator, and the young lawyer held the door and then thought better of it and took the stairs. The rest is short, because none of it took as long as the 27 days did. The count came in on the 24th of November, short $310,000 and change. The bank called the note. My son was indicted in January and took a plea in the spring. Sloan filed for dissolution in February, and her mother gave a statement without anybody asking her twice, which surprised nobody who was in that hallway. The ejectment case settled in May. He signed the building back. 6 months and 2 weeks, and there was no moment in it worth telling you about, which is what a legal remedy actually looks like. Now the part that matters more than any of that. Curtis Amaya came back on the 18th of November. 29 years and 9 months when they let him go, and the date mattered. He was vested a long time ago and nobody can take vested from a man. What 30 years of service buys you in that fund is the unreduced early retirement. Go out at 29 years and 9 months instead of 30, and they cut your monthly check for the rest of your life. 10 weeks. That's what that letter cost him. 10 weeks, and about $400 a month until he dies, and his wife's survivor benefit on top of it. I don't think anybody calculated that. Somebody wanted the one man in the building who could read a press and a serial number out of the way before the 22nd of October, and the pension was just something that happened to him on the way. He hit 30 years on the 31st of December. We reopened under the old name on the 15th of January, and the sign painter did the hawk again from the 1984 photograph. I gave Curtis the first sheet. No speech, no plaque. I stood back and let him bring the press up and run it, and he pulled it off the delivery and held it up to the window at a 15-degree angle without being told, because that's what you do. I pushed my wife's chair out the front doors of that courthouse into the rain and I did not look back. Somebody called out behind me, on the steps. I don't know which one of them it was, and I have not asked. I counted to 5 and I kept walking. That's all it is. There's no trick to it. You count to 5. Juny asked me about the reopening on the 2nd of December. She asked what day it was going to be. The woman who told me on the 31st of October not to take her anywhere ever again wanted to know the date. She was there on the 15th of January in her chair, by the delivery end where the light is good, with the mended cushion under her, red thread over faded red, and she stayed 4 hours. So here's what I've got. After 42 years of paper and 27 days of this, everybody looks at the signature. That's the part people fight about, and photograph, and it's the last thing on the page. The signature is not what holds. The signature is just a man agreeing to something on a Tuesday. What holds is the paragraph in the middle that nobody wants to read out loud. The one your lawyer puts in and you're embarrassed by. The one your son sets down on the table and calls ugly. Sal Fabry put 4 sentences in a deed in March and died in a parking lot in April. And those 4 sentences are the reason my wife slept in her own bed on the night of the 13th of November. I never thanked him. He was gone before I knew what he'd done. So that's my question for you. And I mean it, and I'll read the answers. If you gave one of your kids something this year, a house, a business, a piece of land, a signature on a loan, go find the paperwork this weekend and read the middle of it. What's your ugly paragraph? And if there isn't one in there, that's worth knowing too, while there's still time to put one in. Thanks for staying with me all the way to the end. If it was worth your afternoon, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you'd have done in that hallway. I've heard a lot of answers. I'm still not sure mine was the right one.